Thank you, Peter, I think. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Suleiman, et bienvenue à votre capitale nationale. Yes, I often get confused with the British cycler, Jason Kenney. Slightly different body shapes, but I should take in a good example from him. And by the way, Canada won another gold apparently just a couple of hours ago. So go Team Canada. We're owning the podium in Russia. This is great. I want to welcome you all again to your national capital for those of you who are visiting, and for those from away. I know our guest speaker is from Berkeley. I went to college at USF and did some courses in Berkeley. In fact, I did a 10-week intensive Latin course from which I'm still recovering. I think I didn't get any sleep for 10 weeks. But welcome to Canada. Welcome to the cold. I hope you'll survive it. And thank you to all of you for putting together this important forum on really an essential issue for the future of our economy, on youth and digital skills. I'm not speaking for long, but I just wanted to try to situate your conversations today in the context of the Canadian economy, some of its current and future challenges, with the caveat that, of course, for those of you who are not Canadian, in our country, as in most federations, education is primarily a local and provincial level responsibility. And so while we at the federal level observe what's going on in terms of gaps in our educational system, there's not an awful lot we can do about it directly. Our relationship to the post-secondary and primary education systems is it's sometimes the role of a funder, but not very much the role of a policy, setting policy. And so our relationship to the remedy side of this is largely attenuated, but there are things we can and are seeking to do, in part trying to use the federal bully pulpit, as it were, to raise awareness about the need to focus on digital literacy and preparing young Canadians for the workforce of the future. First of all, we are very fortunate, as was alluded to have a relatively vibrant economy and a relatively strong labor force. We've had relatively strong labor force growth since the global economic downturn, certainly at the high end of the OECD and of the G7. However, we continue to see challenges with youth unemployment, as was mentioned, at over 14%. In some regions, youth unemployment is much more problematic than that. In the Greater Toronto area, for example, over 25% of people between the ages of 15 and 25 say they want to work but can't find jobs. And of course, underneath those numbers, there's the bigger and broader problem of youth underemployment. Many young Canadians, many of them with good, even post-secondary educations, who find themselves unemployed, perhaps in the service industry or in low-skilled employment that does not reflect their education or their potential. And we all are frustrated by this, particularly when we see the paradox that most Canadian industries and business organizations tell us that their biggest challenge right now and in the foreseeable future is that of skill shortages. In some places, it's actually a problem of general labor shortages. A couple of weeks ago, I was in southwestern Saskatchewan, where they are at full employment, and anyone who wants a job can find a job, and that is across the entire skill spectrum, from unskilled farm labor to service jobs to trade jobs to highly skilled professions. And there are interesting things going on all across the economy that are relevant to digital literacy. You know, one of the things I just recently learned is, of course, our farmers are becoming increasingly productive thanks in part to bioscience and improving better seeds and better seed technology, but also because, you know, I grew up in the rural prairies when farm technology was pretty basic, mechanical stuff. But now they have these $400,000 combines that are virtually run by computers. When a part starts to go off in the combine as the farmer is harvesting, it automatically, without his knowledge, it automatically sends a message, a wireless message, to the dealer saying what the problem is, and then a new part is needed, which is then delivered. This is the new world in which we're operating, where a Saskatchewan grain farmer is essentially driving over his field at harvest time a computer-operated, a complex piece of equipment that costs $400,000 that requires digital literacy to develop and to operate. And this is something that we need to convey, that many jobs, many occupations that we considered in the past to be low-skilled actually actually require a high level of skills, including digital literacy and competency in maths and science. That is what we're hearing right across the spectrum. I really do find this a paradox because, you know, we talk about the challenge of digital literacy amongst youth. I talk, for example, to the computer gaming industry. I don't know if they're represented here, but they're constantly asking us to help facilitate the admission into Canada of highly skilled programmers from abroad through our temporary foreign worker program, which, as you know, is a politically sensitive subject. They tell us that they depend on the very specific skills of people from abroad which just don't exist in Canada, and they need them just in time. That entire enormous projects in which hundreds of people are employed depend on the right person. There may be 2 or 3 people in some of these areas who know precisely the kind of programming, precisely the kind of coding that's required, and they happen to live in France, the United States, or somewhere else. And I just find this remarkable that we've got millions of young Canadian boys sitting at home playing computer games all day, and yet none of them seem to want to go into computer programming for gaming as a vocation. There seems to be a rather, I mean, that seems really counterintuitive, doesn't it? I mean, that is to say that there is a higher degree of sort of digital literacy in the general sense amongst young people, and yet they're not apparently converting that into a marketable skill in sufficient numbers. As you know, the information communications technology sector is comprised of more than 33,000 companies in Canada, mainly small enterprises. It generates $155 billion in revenues and contributes more than $67 billion to our gross domestic product. And right now, the ICT industry's unemployment rate is less than 3%, that is to say, full employment. ITAC, the Information Technology Association of Canada, says that by 2016, just 2 years from now, there will be 160,000 high-paying jobs in that sector alone going unfilled. And other emerging sectors that rely heavily on information and communications technology will add to that need. The fact that our country and our young people face such an opportunity is good news. But to fully take advantage of it, we need to ensure that today's youth have the skills required to fill these jobs. And one of the most important ways to address this challenge is, of course, through our post-secondary education system. And as I said, this is an area where provincial governments control the levers. But in a system which the federal government helps to fund, both through the student financing system, but also through our Canada Social Transfer, where we contribute about $3 billion a year to provincial post-secondary education programs. And as most of you know, Canada ranks at the top of the developed world when it comes to post-secondary education, at least the frequency of it, with 50% of adults aged 25 to 64 having some form of PSE. That is compared to the OECD average of only 30%. But the question is, what's not right here? We're investing, by the way, also governments, the public sector in Canada invests more in education and skills development than any other country in the OECD. Regrettably, the private sector in Canada invests almost less than any other country in the OECD on education and skills development. So we're making this huge public spend. We have a disproportionately large number of Canadians with post-secondary education. We are a highly educated population, and yet, in many critical industries, not just ICT, we see very significant skills gaps developing. Part of that, of course, is just a function of demography as the baby boomers retire, and lower birth rates, meaning that we don't have the same kind of population growth. But we are maintaining very high levels of immigration, 250,000 new permanent residents a year, the highest relative levels in the developed world. But I'll tell you this, as a former Minister of Immigration, as wonderful and welcoming as this country is towards newcomers, as much as we need their talents, I think there's something wrong if we end up finding ourselves turning primarily, or significantly even, to overseas talent while leaving young Canadians out of the cycle of prosperity, out of the opportunities that they should have, frankly, first. And this is a really critical issue. I mean, think about the social implications of this. If these trends continue, and we continue to staff some of our most critical tech jobs with people coming from abroad, either on a temporary or permanent basis, and younger Canadians find themselves disproportionately unemployed or underemployed, I don't like what that implies for social cohesion and inclusion in our society. Right now, we have simply too many college and university grads without jobs, despite the evidence of skill shortages in many sectors, as I've said. In the last decade, university enrollment in Canada has skyrocketed from 850,000 students in 2001 to 1.2 million in 2011, an increase of nearly 400,000 students. However, in the science, technology, engineering, and maths fields, enrollment has only increased over the same time by 50,000 students. So everyone's saying that's the most critical area, and yet, in relative terms, it's shrinking as a percentage of students entering PSE. In the last decade, we've seen a 220,000 person increase in the number of women enrolling in university, but of that increase, only 15,000 more women are enrolling in the STEM fields. These fields used to make up 24% of university enrollment in our country. That has now dropped to 20%. And at the very same time that students are turning away from the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, employment in those areas is growing at 2.5% a year. Again, there's a real gap here. That growth rate, by the way, 2.5% a year in the field, is double the growth rate of general employment in Canada. The Canadian Occupational Projection System states there will be over 1.1 million job openings in the science, technology, engineering, and maths fields in the coming decade. This speaks to the very heart of the reforms we need to make. Students are turning away from the very fields in which they are most likely to be well employed and realize their potential. That's now the search for remedies, and that's what I hope to read your conference summation for, because frankly, at the federal level, the levers that we have are limited. One thing that we announced in last year's budget is a reallocation of some of the spending in my department towards programming that helps to provide young people with interesting and relevant information on labor market outcomes. And we hope to be launching this early this year, where young people will be able to use, for example, wireless apps to figure out what the unemployment rates are in various occupations and sectors, what the income returns might be, so at least they can have a little bit more objective information. Much more needs to be done. I've invited my provincial counterparts, who are responsible for human resources and skills development, to visit Europe with me, particularly Germany, to examine their dual training system. When we think of the German system, we often think of skilled trades apprentices, but in fact, they're doing, I think, an excellent job, arguably much better than Canada, in preparing young people at the secondary school level for jobs in the ICT sector through STEM disciplines as well. And they do so, of course, through a very integrated partnership between employers, unions, the state and federal governments. So what I hope comes from your deliberations today are concrete suggestions that I can share with my provincial counterparts about how in your cutting-edge disciplines we can make young Canadians aware of the enormous potential that lies in these fields, and so that the enormous public resources that we're expending on education and skills development actually gets the bang for the buck that we need for young people and for our economic future. So thank you very much, and good luck for your deliberations today. I hope you get a chance every now. You're going to watch the Olympics on the side here a little bit. It looks like it's going to be a good one for Canada, so I hope that your conference has that same kind of sense of aspiration that our young people do in Sochi today. Thank you very much. Bienvenue. Merci.